Welcome to the Oshkosh Advisory Park Board meeting for August 12th, 2019. Welcome, everybody. If everybody could please turn their phone to silent, that would be wonderful. So we'll call this meeting to order, and we'll do the roll call.
Davis, Dearth,
Here.
Royal,
Here.
Hudak, Metz,
Here.
Miller,
Here.
Millet, Peschel.
Here.
The next item on the agenda is the election of officers, but with the excused board members tonight, we are going to go ahead and table this for our September meeting. So we're going to move on in the agenda from there. That brings up the approval of the June 10th minutes. Are there any additions, subtractions, deletions, anything for that? See none. Do we need to make a motion? Somebody?
Second.
Okay.
All in favor? Is that right?
Yeah.
Aye. All opposed? Right, moving on. We'll do the same thing for the July 8th minutes.
Move to approve as written.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Now up for citizen statements for items not listed on the agenda. Are there any citizens who would like to make a statement for items not listed on the agenda tonight? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to old business. Is there any old business to discuss this evening? All right, we are moving right along. On to new business. The first one is the presentation by Smith Group on the conceptual designs for the Lakeshore Park Master Plan. How we'll do this is Ray will give us an update, and then the board will discuss, and hopefully just after that discussion, then we'll open up to public statements, and then bring it back to the board. So Ray?
Thanks, Tony. We have Smith Group here this evening. We have their full team. We have Nathan, Greg, and Kathleen. What we've been doing over the last month since the public input has been taking place since late this spring is really working towards three options or three conceptual plans. That was part of the scope of work that was in the agreement with Smith Group. So that's where we're at this evening. And you had those in your packets, and we do send them out. We have a stakeholder list of individuals that, when this process started, said they'd like to stay involved. We sent these out to those individuals as well, so that we kept them in the loop. But in your packets, you should have seen concept or plan 1, 2, and 3. And we're going to turn it over to Nathan shortly to go through each of those plans. But really where we're looking at for the board and the public is take a look at the plans. These are not set in stone by any means. We can pick and choose certain things from Plan 3 to put in Plan 1 or 2. It's really an a la carte right now of things that you'd like to see incorporated into a preferred master plan. So I think Nathan will walk us through that process. It's really going to be a working meeting again tonight, I would say, with the board as well as public comments to say what we're working towards is that preferred master plan. That's our goal after tonight, is to come back next month with that one plan that is something we'll have some final input on and some final details to work out, but then moving that on from this board to the Plan Commission and Common Council. So are there any questions to start, at least process-wise? And as Tony said, I think it'd be good if we have the presentation, maybe let the board have some discussion about things they like or would like to see moved around in the plan that might answer some of the same questions the citizens might have, but then obviously we'll let the citizens provide their thoughts and inputs to anything as well. So Nathan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ray. So, like Ray said, we've been working for the past month or so since we last saw you on the development of 3 concept design alternatives for Lakeshore. So on the screen is just kind of the main points we're going to hit today. Talk about status and schedule, really quickly review the public input summary that we looked at in depth last time, review really quickly some analysis and design drivers, and then get into these first ideas for the park itself. So this is the schedule that we've been looking at for the past few months. So we are there in August 12th. We're about halfway through the process. So we've worked through kind of the data collection, the public engagement process. We talked last time about the fact that that first month or so of concept design was really us processing all of the data that was returned to us through the public engagement process. So really this past, second half of July, first half of August has been where we've started to really dive into thinking about how the park might be reorganized and what we could add to it in terms of program and public amenities. And then what we'll do is, based on the input from the board and from the public today, we'll work the next month or so on a much more detailed version of what you're seeing on the screen. So either advancing a preferred plan or, like Ray said, a hybrid of different pieces, kind of hardlining that so we understand the extents of it. We can start to put order of magnitude costs to it. And then that will ultimately help us understand how to phase it for you so that, everybody understands what we're getting for phase one with the money we have now, and then how the plan might be built out incrementally in the future. So we'll go through the summary stuff really quickly. Last time we talked about the results of the public visioning meeting, and we had a bunch of different examples of how we gathered input from the public during that outreach effort. We also dove into the Polco survey data, and we won't go through this in a lot of detail tonight, but we polled the public, got information on how they use the park today, what times of year they use the park, what types of amenities they'd like to see in the future Lakeshore Park, and we also got feedback not just through that kind of online application, but written comments via comment cards both at the State of the City event and at the public visioning session. And those comments pretty consistently followed what we were seeing in the Polco data. And ultimately, where we landed was, and this was a slide we saw last time, was this idea that it's really a passive recreation park. Right? It's not a park, packed full of ball fields. It's about getting out in nature, seeing a restored landscape and kind of engaging with it. There was a lot of focus on native habitats and ecosystems and wanting to, there was a push to see those brought back and restored. This idea of art as a significant component. So really, that's very much tied to this idea of community identity. The idea that we wanted to highlight the importance of community, and that's again this idea of community identity, but it's also kind of wrapped into this idea of some of the amenities that people were showing a preference for in terms of picnic shelters, community buildings, picnic lawns, basically spaces to gather. And then this idea of the importance of respecting the history and culture of the site and of peoples who used this site in the past. In the pre-settlement era, all the way through to today. And we kind of touched last time on the importance of acknowledging that without trying to be too prescriptive, because that in itself is an entire process of engaging those communities, and we don't want to try and prescribe an end product for that process. We just want to acknowledge a place on the site for that to happen, and be clear that that's an important part of a more detailed design process in the future. Then we also talked about a couple things that jumped out at us very early on as key drivers. One was this idea of water, and we talked about the idea that the remnants of this kind of slough or river meander that you see in the aerial on the right are kind of, you see little traces of that in where the ponds are today. The ponds have been, revamped a number of times over the history of the site, but there's this interest in restoring the site back to, kind of pushing it back to this former version of itself, both for kind of functional reasons, because something that's more connected is going to be, it's going to better connect people through the site, it's going to better convey water through the site. But also because something that's more connected, just works better from kind of a habitat and an ecological standpoint. We talked a lot about edges because there are a lot of edges. There's the edge at the lake, which is, primarily, concrete rubble and revetment. We're interfacing with 2 parks, and we're interfacing with the Oshkosh Ave kind of redevelopment corridor to the south, and then we have the Oshkosh Corp border within the site. And then this idea that because of the way the site lays out and where the Oshkosh Corp property is, there's really this kind of setup of a west park and an east park, and it's an opportunity because it gives us 2 places to build a park, but it's also highlights the importance of the connections both north and south of the Oshkosh Corp property. And then back in July, we talked about this idea of how we're starting to focus on these ideas of threads, places, and moments. So we thought it'd be helpful if we look for a couple minutes at what we're thinking when we say threads, places, and moments. And so in the options that you saw in the preview packet, a lot of these things were labeled, but we didn't have all these precedent images gathered. So it's kind of helpful to give you a visual, I think, for what it is we're thinking as we're drawing these things. So, one of these threads that's really emerging as one of the most important and significant threads in terms of organizing the site is this idea of water and then the associated restored habitats at the water's edge. And this is just a handful of examples of what that might look like. And importantly, we had a conversation with engineering a couple weeks ago and really got our hands around how the pond system is working. There's been a lot of concern voiced from the public and also from engineering, and rightly so, that some of these concepts that suggest a pretty significant reorganization of how water is moved through the site need to attend to how the site functions today. The ponds at the northeast corner of the site are pulling in stormwater runoff from the neighborhood, and the rework of those ponds when it was still a golf course about 20 years ago, I think. Is that right, Ray? Yeah, about 20 years ago. Went a long way towards making the golf course drier and also alleviating some minor flooding and standing water issues in the neighborhood. So we're cognizant of how it's working today. It's hard to see here, but on the right, that's kind of a series of design drivers related to the water system. And so first and foremost, the idea is that we will either maintain or improve the pond system function, as we advance these master plan ideas. We also are going to be cognizant of integrating existing stormwater infrastructure, of which there's been quite a bit built recently, much of it tied to the roads associated with the Oshkosh Corp development and the Corp property itself. There's this idea that we want to enhance water quality using things like aeration and pumping water through the site. We want to restore water-centric ecosystems and habitats, and we also want to leverage those restoration efforts as a recreational amenity. So we want to get people close to that. We want people to learn from it. That was also kind of an important topic that came out of that Polco and public engagement process, which was this idea of not only just engaging with nature, but learning from that engagement, kind of the park as a classroom sort of idea. And then lastly, we've been talking a lot about any significant gesture at the park related to the water should really start to think a little bit bigger. So, thinking district scale, how can what we're doing with water on the site enhance kind of the function of infrastructure in this part of the city. So another layer of threads is this idea of pathways, boardwalks, and interpretive trails. And so right now we're kind of fleshing out the bones of how this works. Next time when we have a, kind of a consolidated preferred option, not only will we show you where the pathways are, but you'll also get a better understanding of the hierarchy of pathway types. Because, as we're cycling through these iterations of the plan, we're thinking about it from everything from kind of rustic compacted gravel or dirt single track trails to accessible boardwalks to, paved pathways that can accommodate cyclists and park service vehicles. So there's kind of this whole range of means of access. And then in terms of places, we've been thinking in plan a lot about buildings, and sort of one subset of buildings are this idea of open buildings or shelters. So this includes picnic shelters. It could include restrooms, whether they're four-season or not, and then other buildings like in the top right there, you can see an example of a project we did in Euclid with it's a pretty substantial fishing pier that jets out into Lake Erie with kind of a structure over the top of it. And then this idea of buildings like the one on the bottom right is a trailhead structure that we did down in Arizona, so very rusty and desert looking, but the idea of the building being something that is mostly, when you're in the building, you're mostly outside, right? The idea isn't to go to the park and then sit inside a building that encloses you. The idea is to have a building that's very open and engages the landscape. So we're starting to think about kind of this subset of structures. We're also starting to think about four-season buildings, and that can be anything from a pretty utilitarian structure like you see on the bottom right, and that's a sailing center at Northwestern University, to kind of a multi-building cluster that again is very much about kind of activating the park and the landscape, but it does provide a year-round function. So it's a fully conditioned, fully enclosed building. And then this was something that came up in our conversation last time related to sound attenuation with the freeway. This idea of earthworks, this is also kind of tied into that idea of community identity, because this is a pretty flat site, and especially with the changes to the bridge as you go over the lake, right, it's harder to see over the rails now. So this idea of getting something up high that creates an identity for the park and an identity for the community, but also kind of shelters that west half of the park by enclosing it with a big landform, is something we're starting to think about. And then this is another layer, kind of like that idea of the hierarchy of pathways, where it's sort of built into the plan, but we're not quite there yet. This idea of these moments. So these are the smaller spaces along that hierarchy of trails that kind of give more life to them and activate them. And this one we didn't talk about last time, but I think we didn't bring it to the presentation last time, but I think it kind of filtered out of the conversation we were having, was this idea of identity related to either, a literal identity for the community, a sign on top of the hill, or this idea of an art installation or a light installation or an interactive sculpture or something, whether it's on the hilltop, whether it's a series of things that you kind of discover as you wander the park, that really, again, gives people some kind of sense of community and sense of ownership, in something unique, but also could be that iconic thing that you see from the road. So these are the three concept design alternatives that were in your packet, and you've had a little bit of time to digest them, so I don't want to go through them like too laboriously, but we did kind of pull these apart in that series of diagrams. So I think what we'll do is just kind of hit on the broad strokes, and then if you have questions as we go through it, feel free to ask. Otherwise, we have a slide at the end that kind of compares all three, and that might be a good stopping point too, to kind of dive deeper. So this is the existing site, and we've kind of rendered in the Oshkosh Corp property there, so it feels contiguous with the rest of the park now. And this is option one. So option one is kind of trying to work as best it can with the existing pond system layout. So what you're seeing kind of rendered in blue is more or less the existing pond structure from the golf course. with a few modifications to make the ponds feel as though they're kind of more connected. And the thinking is that all of the ponds on the east and all of the ponds on the west are kind of connected together thematically, and sometimes where it's possible physically, with this idea of a link of wetland vegetation. And where it's possible, we'd like to look at the possibility of when these ponds bounce, when it rains really hard, letting one pond flow into the next one instead of them only being connected by pipe. So you kind of get into that idea of kind of emergent wetlands and things like that. At the west half of the site, that doesn't work on the screen. West half of the site, we have 2 lawns and 2 picnic shelters. And then at the east half of the site, 2 larger lawns that are kind of anchored by a 4-season building at the end of Pinoqua. And kind of going back to those images that we just looked at, you know, that the scale of that thing will ultimately, if it's built, be a function of what program the city decides to put into it. But the idea of there being this, you know, year-round anchor at the end of Pinoqua that activates that part of the park. And then suggesting, restored lakeshore edge throughout. And then this option, because it does keep the ponds and because the earthworks are not as extensive as they are in some of the other options, the trail network in this option is a little bit more robust, I think. So a little bit more variety and a little bit more kind of meander, especially at that west half, where the east half is very much about kind of linking you to, you know, east to west and north to south. And this just helps you get a feel for that idea of the ponds, and then the green being that idea of the wetland link or the restored lakeshore edge. So you get a feel for how extensive that framework is. And then these are those places that we're trying to pull out. So the yellow dots on the left are the open air structures that are tied to lawns. The green are big open lawns. The purple building on the right is that idea of the year-round building with restrooms. And then the circles you see at the perimeter, that's pretty consistent, and the spacing is pretty consistent from plan to plan. The idea there is that's kind of a pedestrian-focused gateway or entry into the park. So that would be the point of entry where you're greeted with, you know, a kiosk, some signage, some wayfinding, things like that. And the extent to what you find there is really going to vary on by location. You know, the one next to Mary Jewel Park, for example, is not going to be as robust as what you'd find at the end of Pinoqua, where all of this activity and parking and year-round building are. And then this just helps understand kind of that the connectedness of the site from east to west. And again, like I said, you know, a pretty robust trail network on that west half. And here the yellow are suggesting boardwalks or bridges across the existing pond system. So kind of, you know, making an effort to leverage what's out there and really engage with it. So option 2 rethinks how that water system works. So this one, in lieu of the pond system, we have these 2 kind of meandering streams, and if you want to think about it, there's almost a headwaters where there's the pinch point at the middle of the park at the south edge. So the water would be, you know, in essence, flowing both north and east from that location. The ponds are pumped today, so we would just be pumping water to a different location to make this happen. Again, tying this idea of a kind of wetland vegetation link to that pond network. Here, we're suggesting a little bit more investment in the west half of the park, where the first option was pretty light touch. This one is calling out a nature center, which is the
Point an out trees.
Yeah. Thanks, Ray. So nature center at the west half. And then what you're seeing, the big kind of butterfly-shaped things, the idea there is those are 2 very substantial earthworks that would be visible from the freeway. So, you know, the extent of those things, we have so much space over there that we could really kind of play around with it. But, think of something that's 60 feet up in the air with a little overlook structure on one hill, and then, some sort of interesting artwork on the other hill to really not only kind of create that calling card, but also create a place for people to go to. It becomes a destination, and kind of a cool part of the experience and the journey of meandering through the park. And then again, in this option, there's a couple of kind of functional lawn spaces at the west half of the park. And the east half, again, has that four-season building that's kind of the anchor at the end of Pinoqua. And here we were starting to suggest that the interface between Mary Jewel and Lakeshore could be activated with some additional program at Lakeshore. So here, the idea is in the gray box in that corner of the site, that a nature playground could be a way to kind of serve some of the, people are playing a ball game and kids are waiting their turn to play, or families are there watching, and there's kind of an interesting dynamic between the spaces. And then lastly, what we're starting to do here in this option is suggest that some of the parking at the east end of the site could be distributed. It doesn't all have to be carried by Lakeshore. So, there's a couple new ball fields over there. The idea being, if we pull some of that parking into Rainbow, we're kind of better distributing it relative to the amenities that are scattered in the adjacent parks. And so this is kind of cool, because with this option where we're really kind of pulling these ponds aren't just punctuated pieces of water now, it becomes a ribbon, so we're pulling it all the way through the site. So comparing this to that first option, you really get a feel for the potential for this corridor to serve as a connector between east and west, which is one thing we really like about option 2. And again, kind of these really broad strokes in terms of where program lies. But you can see here we're starting to get a little bit more balanced, whereas the west half in option 1 was pretty subtle. It was basically the 2 structures, some parking, and the 2 lawn areas surrounded by the restored ponds. This one, we actually start to introduce more program in terms of the hilltop structure, the pathways up the hill, the artwork, a year-round building, that sort of thing. And again, trail network not quite as extensive as option 1, but still, pretty robust. And again, that kind of next layer in terms of hierarchy is the next step there. And then this is the last option. So I'll try and go quickly through this one. Option 3 really tried to carve a bigger space out of the west half of the park. So what you're seeing there is a large flexible lawn. We're thinking of it as a big kind of community green / flex lawn it's big enough that you could paint out, a professional league soccer field on it. That wouldn't be the intent, but if you wanted to go out there and have a soccer game or a game of ultimate frisbee or something, you could bring some cones and make that happen. There's a series of 3 picnic structures that ring the lawn. The one to the south that's closest to the parking lot would have restrooms in it. That big lawn space is kind of bookended by 2 large earthworks. In this option, we weren't suggesting access or any sort of object or destination on top, but that could certainly, be something that gets layered into this third option. And then the water at the west half of the park in this option is consolidated. So instead of a series of small ponds, it's imagining one larger pond that feels like an extension of the lake. And the thinking being that could serve some winter season use, an ice skating pond, a hockey pond, something like that. And then at the east half of the park, again, we have the 4-season building at the end of Pinoqua. Here we did tweak the ponds a little bit, and what that allowed us to do is kind of have this series of spaces that are pretty well connected along that whole east edge. You can kind of see them like, a little bit of a chain wrapping the east edge of the site. And we did add additional parking here. We actually suggested a lot at the north end of Mary Jewel. And then one of the bigger gestures in this third option is this idea of a pretty significant fishing pier slash boating pier that basically carries the, almost looks like an extension of the Pinocchio right-of-way and extends out into the lake. And here you can see that because we consolidated the west pond, that idea of kind of the wetland link is, you know, there's kind of a bigger break in that system in this third option. But we were suggesting a more robust kind of lake edge treatment here, where it's not just replacing riprap. It's actually letting that shoreline edge meander a little bit. And then here you can really get a feel for this option starting to balance out the two halves of the site in terms of kind of functional space to a degree that the second option was starting to do, but this one really starts to kind of even out the scales a little bit. And because some of those spaces on the west half of the park in option 3 are so big, the trail network, kind of wrapping the perimeter of those spaces is necessarily a little bit tighter, but still, connections throughout, connections for the regional trail, and entry nodes throughout. So, and I think I covered this throughout, so maybe just land on a bigger version of that. And if we need to enlarge any of it to see it a little bit better, I can certainly do so on that.
Well, thank you. That's really cool. I mean, I think everybody in this room is very excited about this. As we bring it back to the board, from your experience, what is the best way to discuss it? Should we go concept by concept and look at what we like and don't like, or is it more productive to look at all three together and just kind of try to compare it that way?
I think having them all together on the screen, I think, might spur some conversation, but I can always flip around if we need to see things, zoom in on something. So.
Okay. So then we'll go back to the board for questions, comments, and just have a conversation.
I guess I'm going to speak from the context of what I ultimately would like to see, kind of based on what's in all three of these. So, and just generally at this point, I'm not going to put it all out there. But the one thing that stands out for me the most is that option number 2 doesn't have a cultural marker in it. And so I just kind of want to know, is there a reason that was left out, or?
No, you're right. We didn't, so in options 1 and 3, we kind of got a space kind of off the northeast corner of the court property there, because that's closest to that significant, their area of significance. In option 2, we thought it would be an interesting idea to leverage the linear nature of the water and actually, instead of having just one place, have a series of nodes along that water walkway.
So that's actually there, it's just not stated in the way it's just a historical marker.
Right.
Route, okay, got it. Got it.
Bob, you and I probably spend the most time. I'm laughing because you beat me to the punch, but I like things out of all three of them. I don't like one plan in particular over the other one. But from my starting point, I started with Plan 1, taking the hilltop art from Plan 2, putting it in there. Again, taking from Plan 2 the natural playground by Mary Jewell. I think that makes sense. From Plan 3, I like the stepping stones, for people to get closer to the water, and everything that comes from Plan 3.
Oh, Bill, sorry.
Oh.
Plan 2 or Plan 3?
I think the stepping stones were in
Plan 2.
Were they in Plan 2? Yep, okay, sorry. But what I'm saying is put those into Plan 1. Like Bob said, I think the hilltop art is huge. That cultural connection over there is absolutely huge. But those stepping stones, I think, are real huge for people to get closer to the water experience. I mean, we've got more waterfront here. I mean, we've almost got as much here as we do down in Menominee, so we want to take advantage of that. And then I'd also like to take from Plan 3, the flex lawn. I don't want to see sports there, but I think, you know, you could do all kinds of cool things, you know, maybe rustic encampments or something like that with that flex lawn space, or mini concerts or something. I think I'd like to see that incorporated there. And then simplify some of these trails. These trails are gonna be expensive going over this water. These bridges will be just as much or more than the entire trail system there. So maybe clean up that trail system a little bit. It's a little cluttered to the west over there. I mean, that's just my, you know, and being so invested in this project, that's kind of my thought, is taking a little bit of something from everything and putting it into Plan 1. And I'm not trying to make my opinion yours, but I just,
I know, me personally, if I had to pick a plan as is and just to take it, I like option 2 the best. I think that it's really neat to have the connectivity of the water, especially compared to the third option, which makes it feel a little bit more like 2 separate parks almost completely. And I think that it would look really neat and be a fun, you know, path to take along that with all that water there. I agree completely with what Bill says. I think that the bridges are a tough thing, but if we can make that work, the benefit of it could be worth the cost with that kind of stuff. I also think that the neat part about Plan 2 as well, when you're talking about giving some elevation and giving an overlook and perhaps connecting the bridges to those 2 overlooks or points, just a really neat something that isn't here in our city, and would be a neat addition there. I like what Bill said about the stepped, you know, walk towards the water to get closer to that too. One thing I didn't really love about it is the nature classroom building. I know I have a hard time envisioning that, how that would work into that plan. One thing I did love about it, and I think I was on record earlier, I really like the idea of the nature playground. I think that that's a forward-thinking thing for the community, and I hadn't even noticed where you'd put it next to the baseball, softball field there, but it would be an opportunity to get people there to overflow as well. So I guess overall, I'm really impressed with Plan 2. So, yeah.
Tony, the reason I liked Plan 1 as a starting point, and you can do it with 2, but I think Plan 2, that shoreline is going to be brutal to permit. I mean, if you look at including all of that stuff, and I think the permitting process and the legal process will cost us a fortune. Nathan, can you chime in on that maybe?
Yeah, so that's a good topic to kind of discuss as a group. So we were actually thinking that it's true that permitting something like that that's just a process we'd have to go through. We were kind of thinking about the lakeshore edge improvements, especially as an opportunity to potentially leverage grant dollars via, you know, DNR or the Corps or other entities for things like spawning habitat restoration or shoreline stabilization or, you know, transient dockage. There's all manner of funding sources that we often work with municipalities to secure. So we would try and tailor those kind of more, I guess, permit intensive moves with efforts to extend the city's dollars by looking for partners elsewhere.
Just real quickly, Nathan, just from your past experience, I know a lot of the grants we deal with, it's either 50% match or more potentially. What are most of these grants? Because there's still going to be that cost to the city. It's not 100% grant funded. Right. So I just
right. There's still a cost to the city. That's correct. It varies program by program. I don't know specifically. 50, some less. 30 in some cases.
Okay.
I'd say as a benchmark. You know, I think your thought was, again, if you were going to invest the 50. If you were going to invest the 50 anyway, can you with the dollars we're gonna spend on any scheme, can that get you these additional enhancements? I think whether it's the shoreline or whether, again, even the linear water system, it starts to add 2 and 3 layers of different functions that, again, spawning in connectivity as well, too. You start to get some sort of healthy community benefits.
Sure.
Too. So, obviously, really early in the process, that was a thought that maybe the match is your equalizer, but then with these other enhancements, you were able to bring in dollars you couldn't with another scheme.
Right.
And I hate to be the wet blanket, but I've been on this board for a long time. If we, regardless of which plan we picked, where's a starting point here for cost, if you had to guess? Today, I mean, we're talking $15 million.
Oh, for everything?
Yeah.
I think we're a little early to spitball it.
So just coming back to the cultural significance of the park and everything, I think I'm really comfortable with the nodes around the park in number 2, but I'd really like to kind of narrow in as having a significant historical spot of the park in that area along where I think it's where the old clubhouse used to be. That is historically significant in regards to civilized, people building cities and communities there. So I'd like to see that added in as part of that as well, especially since we know that we are getting some national recognition related to that as well. Correct, Ray? That is coming about.
I haven't gotten final word, but I know it was in front of the the historics, yes. But I think a lot of these are good points we can make, whether it's the cultural node or the cultural area up on the clubhouse site near that. And as Nathan and I make the list, whichever plan they come back with, make sure and include those, because I think that's something we heard throughout this process.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that if we're gonna denote the cultural significance throughout the park, it's also important to note one of the most significant cultural significant spots of the park as well. So.
A question that I did have as I was looking at all three, it kind of appeared as far as number of parking spaces fairly similar. Is that correct? Or, I mean, was there one plan that features more heavily on that, or as you're looking at that?
I think number 3 kind of shows the parking a little bit, but I want to draw, Tony, and I hope I'm not interrupting you, but I want to draw that parking from number 3 into number 1, and kind of do it that way. Is that kind of what you're looking at, the parking from number 3?
Yeah, just as far as, I mean, I know that 2 has one large one, the other ones have small ones, so I was just kind of looking at how much and what, I mean, part of the decision as you compare all of them is where the access is coming from, and 1 has essentially 2 places to park coming into the 2 is basically the same way, and then but you look at 3 and it does have almost 4 different places where you could park and then get into there. So,
Yeah, the moving from scheme 1 to scheme 3, it definitely builds in terms of total parking count, and that's really a function of a couple things. I mean, 3 has the most because it just at the east it went the furthest in terms of accommodating the nearby parks, Mary Jewel and Rainbow, and having kind of those satellite lots there. And then because there's that bigger area at the west, we proposed a bigger parking lot over there as well.
Okay.
But the east lot in option 2 is pretty substantial, so that also builds relative to 1. So you can think about it in that way. Fewest to most.
It looks like option 1 only has 1 restroom too, on the far east side. So
That's right.
there's no restroom on the left side.
But I think that goes to Bob's point that if you put that cultural center or that building over there, I think you would attach bathrooms to that, so.
And-
I'm guessing, right? Is that accurate?
But I think Bob was saying, and correct me if I'm
Sure.
wrong. So in option 2, we had imagined, in all the options, we had this little, or in option 1 and option 3, we had that little
Yep.
knuckle there for the cultural history recognition. In option 2, we didn't show that, and we suggested that it would be distributed. But I think your point, Bob, is that even if it's distributed, we should still have something at that
Correct.
point.
Right.
That's such a significant
Yes.
point. So in this one, we did not, we showed all the, or in one, we showed all the structures to the west as just, again, that open air idea. We could add something, or there's always the possibility of more of like a trailhead restroom type structure that would happen close to the parking lot. So you would, you know, you'd have a little bit of a walk, but from a, you know, I mean, option one was really trying to keep everything pretty compact in terms of level of investment. So I think being cognizant of extending infrastructure into the site and things like that, but it could easily be adapted to have those facilities on the left as well.
Just back to Becky's point, as far as the number of restrooms, we got to remember that at Mary Jewel, there is a restroom facility there as well. So, you know, even though we're not noting on the Lakeshore site, there is a restroom facility right by the bowl
Yeah, but
diamonds.
that's still on the east side, isn't it?
Right, I just want to make sure that,
Nothing from the west side.
correct.
But I think I agree with Becky too, on all of these plans, we show some type of shelter here, and we could put a bathroom, you know, even if it's a shared bathroom along with that. I think we do need one over there.
Yeah, I think all schemes can do that. I think, yeah,
Okay.
something even more primitive and, like I said, smaller over there.
That was our number
More of a
2
trailhead.
complaint, not enough bathrooms.
Just not a porta potty.
No, not that.
They burn easier though, Bob.
A couple things. So my question, actually, one question that I have is the extension of that parking area into Rainbow Park. That is considered Rainbow Park, right? That east area?
Which plan are you on, Bob? I'm sorry.
Actually, I think hold on.
Plan 3, I think.
Plan
two.
3 is, Plan 2 and
Two or
3, I think,
three.
has
Yep.
a parking area
Yep.
that extends all the way into Rainbow Park, and now, I know there's a couple things that are going on in that park. One is the softball field. The second is that parking area has been multiple things over the years, I think. I think it's been a tennis court at one point, it's been a hockey court, or a hockey rink, some
Makeshift
other
pickleball courts.
pickleball court, many different things. And so, I mean, because that parking area really isn't that close to Lakeshore, are we really viewing that as an extension of the use that would be taking place in Rainbow Park? It's out of place in my mind as it
Nathan,
relates
before
to Lakeshore.
I can jump on just a little bit, because if you take a look at option 1, and the parking that's shown on the Rainbow Park site, on the
Yes.
north of the Ball Diamond, that's actually in the Rainbow Park master plan.
Okay.
To have some parking area up there. That north side has changed conceptually in the Rainbow Park plan, because we had a shelter up there with some off-season storage for the golf courts and
Okay.
golf carts and so forth.
Sure, yep.
Which no longer is needed, but there is the need for the parking. So that parking lot, as shown in Rainbow, is pretty much carried over to this plan. The idea of possibly adding some down onto the old hockey rink, pickleball courts, that's something Chad and I looked at this year as the question came up from the neighbors. Is there something we can do near term to get some parking down there? And we feel that that's an area we could potentially use for some parking, knowing that we're looking to expand pickleball courts in other parts of the city as well. Because right now it's a concrete slab that the pickleball players, I don't think, are using it anymore, because they've gone down to Menominee Park on the new courts, and we're looking at in the CIP, when we redo the South Park tennis courts, to add pickleball there as well. So we'll be trying to get more to the west side too.
So, and that parking lot would be supportive of the increased use of that softball field as well, correct?
Both those areas,
Both those,
and I
yeah.
think it would be both. The one that's shown off the road
Yep.
on option 1 would be for both Lakeshore as well as the uses at Rainbow.
Okay.
But the one specifically on the tent or the pickleball courts would be more supportive for Rainbow.
So then it just brings me back to my question, is that more for Lakeshore needs, or is that more for Rainbow's needs? I guess
Well, I think we're mixing two things, because we're really showing what's in Rainbow Park's plan. So we knew we needed that. I would say right now it's going to support both, depending on the time of the year, the time of the day, but it's incorporating what's in one document into this document as well.
okay,
that
thank
help?
you, yes.
Yeah, I think in all schemes, Nathan talked about kind of the edges approach, and I think there's an intentional move to sort of blend that edge of those two parks over there. So if we can get a twofer out of a parking lot or a trail, I think in particular schemes 1 and 2, where that's the activity cluster, I think we were looking hard at that.
All right. I got another question.
Go figure.
Actually, it's your question. Do you want to take it? No. Okay. So in option number 2, we have these islands on the northeast corner of the plan here. I don't know that those are existing islands. So are we talking about using something that's existing, or are we talking about creating something?
The idea in option 2 and option 3, kind of at that location, I would think about it more like resculpting that whole shoreline.
Okay.
It is a floodplain, so we can't just go in there and add fill. So there'd be a
I see what you're talking. So you're
Cut flow
talking
balance.
about creating waterways within the existing body
Yeah.
that's there already.
I
Okay.
think I'd say the way I've been thinking about it is it's more an exercise in articulating the shoreline that's there than it
Sure.
is about creating something totally new.
So then the idea that if those wanted to be functional, we would be providing canoes and kayaks that people would be able to use to go to those sites.
If they were for recreation
They were for
purposes or
recreation.
if they were stable enough,
Okay.
sure. If they were more just sort of like kind of emergent wetlands, little shallows
Okay.
with stuff
Sure.
growing up through the lake,
Picnic
probably
camping
different
points.
story.
But I
Or,
think,
or maybe fish habitat restoration. That
I
would
don't think it's deep
improve.
enough. I think you're talking, if it's there, it's probably not even a foot deep, is it? I mean.
No,
Oh,
no.
so
right, so
nobody's,
it's-
yeah.
Got it.
It's very shallow
Yeah.
all the way out.
That's
Right.
why I think it's gonna be tough to permit Plan 2 and
Sure.
Plan 3.
Okay.
That's all.
I think I might actually disagree with Mr. Miller on something here. So I think, I like a mixture of a lot of trails, but I also like the trail that goes over the pond, where the pond comes from the lake into that site. I think that's a really cool spot that can be created there. And not to add more money or laborious thoughts to creating something, but even like a stopping point in the middle of that pond there on that bridge, I think might be really cool. Maybe at its highest point or something, where people can, hang out and stuff like that. I think would be, if we were to incorporate something like that. The other thing too is that just think about how people might use that or access that land. It makes me think that we might want to have bigger facilities on the east part, because there's going to be more access from the city at that point. And that's where I think the great lawn, or the flex lawn that your talk would be. I think is that number 2 that has that flex lawn. Number 2 has that flex lawn with that facility next to it on that east side, and I think that's a really good spot, because I think that's going to be the easiest accessible spot for people to get there.
Right.
And use that.
Yeah, one of the, option 3 sort of went through a couple iterations. It started as an option where we wanted to think about the west half of the park as kind of that piece that can be, big event space, maybe a little noisier because it's near the freeway, stuff like that. And ultimately, after kind of cycling through it, we didn't want to compete with things that are already working in the park system, in terms of venues and things like that. So, so kind of the bones of it stayed the same, creating that large space, but we activated it with the 3 smaller structures instead of kind of one big building.
And then I would actually, Oshkosh loves its splash pads, so I would actually say that having one on that eastern end would be good too. I know that there's a call for a beach there and everything. The beach goes great in Menominee Park. I mean, on the hottest days of the year, it's jam-packed with 50-plus people, and 50-plus adults and 100 other kids. So, my only concern about that is that these are these are at-risk play areas. There's no lifeguards ever at them. And I watch children and adults go out very far into Lake Winnebago from the beach in Menominee Park. I would have a concern about how far they might be able to go out here in regards to that, and,
Current.
bringing in the issue of currents and everything.
Nathan, you want to touch a little bit on the beach aspect? Because I think we had that same conversation on it. It may not be
Yeah.
what the typical beaches people are thinking at Menominee, but
Well, there's a couple of things kind of feeding into the idea of a beach at this location. I know historically it was a swim beach, but we've heard that boat wake in this area is problematic. So establishing a sand beach and keeping it there, it's kind of questionable. So we might think about it more as a cobble beach that you could use to launch a small watercraft like a canoe or kayak.
Okay.
You could even have kind of a back beach condition that's sand, so you have that ability to, play volleyball or lay out on the beach, but it wouldn't be so much about creating a swim beach. It would be more a beach for the sake of small watercraft access and just kind of
Okay.
being at the water line.
almost what it's being used for now, where people are
Right.
walking out with their kayaks, canoes, and getting a dog out there potentially. I think it's more of that access to the water, Bob, than a concentrated swim beach. So as we go through this process, we may need to define that a little bit more on
Yeah.
the project.
Yeah, I think
I agree, right in that
identify
area
the
for boat
quality.
traffic
Yeah.
and other things, it's pretty risky.
Yep.
Couple comments from me if I can. If I had to pick one, I'd say I like option 3 better, but as others have mentioned, pulling from each option into 2 or 3 works for me. Number 1 seems to be a little too segmented to me, doesn't flow or circulate as well. I have a concern about, depending on what the boardwalks are made of, that could be a cash cow for maintenance.
Right.
Trails in our neighborhood that are made of wood, and that is constantly in need of repair. I do like the large green flex areas or large lawn areas in option 3. And the reduced beach in 2. And I do agree the restrooms should be on both sides. I like that seating area in option 3 that gives some opportunity to look at some sporting events that might be going on in that large circle, and creates that noise buffer to the highway yet, and the potential for some winter activity on that enlarged pond would be really interesting. Seems to be adequate parking in all plans, without knowing how many number of spots. But the circulation in 1 just seems too segmented to me. The other 2,
I have a ton of questions. So regarding the winter activities on the pond, I mean, the river never really freezes enough for people to be on it
Right.
without danger. Would this actually be able to freeze?
Well, that's something we've been talking about. We'd have to, if it was a pond that was connected to the storm network that was taking in ice melt and things like that, we might have issues. But if we could have one or a series of these ponds separated from that overflow, we might be able to realistically have some winter recreation on it. So, because we won't have the current and the flowing water that we do out, in the lake and with the river flowing through.
We've also talked, I think, on option 2, some of that, in that same area on the west, that sort of linear, you could do a linear or more of a ribbon skating option 2 that maybe is a little more divorced from the lake as well. So I think there's a couple ways to look at that. It looks all connected by blue, but actually there may be some breaks because of,
Yeah.
as Nathan pointed out, the current system has different breaks because of the flood purpose that it serves.
Just looking at number 2, there's that, what is it, that northwest end along the, I think it's the beginning of Lake Butamore there. What about I know like in the county park, and, you know, we have piers and docks in Oshkosh, but in the county park, on several of their ponds, they have these wood little piers that people can fish off of. They're no more than like 4 feet off the shore and everything, but I think that, you know, if we could incorporate some destination fishing areas along that area, that might be welcome as well.
Mhm.
And that's kind of a quiet area as well, so.
Yeah, it's good that you mentioned that, because that is, you know, when I was talking about that, those two things that we still need to layer in, the hierarchy of the pathways and then the nodes on those pathways, that's exactly what I see as one
Okay.
of those layers. So it's a good.
Okay.
All right. Any more comments from the the board right now?
One more thing, Tony. What I'd like to see is maybe a 10,000-foot level at some of the costs when you come back to us with,
Yep.
with another one, kind of, you know, what each one of our wish lists is gonna cost us.
Yep.
Yeah, that'll be the next step in the process.
Okay.
Right now, as Nathan said, it's really,
Okay.
let's focus down to what we want to start looking at incorporating in that preferred plan, and once we
Okay.
get to that point, we're closer to that point of a rough budget and some phasing ideas.
Yeah.
All right, very good. Well, we will open it up for comments from the citizens. If you are going to come up and speak, please make sure you clearly state your name and address. And you're limited to 5 minutes, so we can make sure we get everybody to have a chance to speak today. So we'll open that up to the citizens.
Evening, Adam, 1624 Western, and the Bike and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. I was hoping you could explain a little more, or talk a little bit more about option 2 and the buildup from a biking and from an accessibility standpoint on the west end there, and sort of give a better example or a clearer understanding of what all that could look like.
So basically at the west end
Correct.
specifically?
Yeah,
So-
particularly coming off of the 41 trail and all that.
Well, the thinking with the earthworks is, you know, we're kind of suggesting the spiraling path up with the bridge between. So the idea would be that we have one accessible route up that is pretty circuitous, depending on how tall this thing gets. We would likely have a more direct stair connection up, I would imagine, at least to the lookout, for those who want to short circuit it. In all the options, we're imagining that there's a perimeter trail looping both the east and the west side of the park that facilitates park maintenance, so that would be a wide, probably concrete or asphalt, what parks standard is. But, you know, hard surface trail that's big enough to drive a pickup truck around. And then all of the trails in between would be boardwalks or paved surface trails. There is always you know, we're a little bit space constrained, but, you know, when I was showing the idea of kind of, what were we calling it, the threads, so the pathway threads. The thinking was that there could be, like, in terms of primary, tertiary, secondary, tertiary, there could be like tertiary trails that would be crushed gravel surfacing and things like that. So, but the connection to the regional trail is really an outgrowth of the Riverfront Trail project, so we're not proposing to change that. We're just connecting to it from the south.
Excellent. Would it be a bridge from the other trail, or is more ground built up to that point?
In all of these, that's a separate project that's actually being constructed now, but it's a good question, so everybody knows. That bridge, I believe, is already on ordered, so there's a bridge connection from the tribal heritage coming into Lakeshore site. And as Nathan said, that perimeter trail along the river is currently being constructed, and hopefully will be completed later this year. I know the bridge is, it's a time frame as far as getting that ordered and placed. That may be further down the road, but it is going to be a bridge connection.
So if we're giving our opinion, I love the west end from 2 and the east end from either 1 or 3.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Steve Hoopman, 5105 Iameda, Oshkosh. Like I said, I agree with you. I like the concepts of 1 and 3 on the east side and the concept of 2 on the west side. The concept of 2, though, on the west side, I would ask, and I don't know if Brady or the Public Works, is that water system going to be big enough? Because I know the ponds in the park are to be the retention ponds for that whole area. And my only concern would be if that waterway, which is nice, is going to be large enough to handle any onslaught of water that might come through the system, because, you know, as you know, we're working on quality but not quantity, so.
It's a good question. Same concerns that I've voiced to the Smith Group, as well as we had the meeting on WebEx, basically with our engineering and stormwater staff, and they brought up some of the same questions. If that stream were going to be constructed, they would obviously be heavily involved to make sure that there would be the flooding issues on the the Graham, Catherine, all the side of the neighborhood there were addressed, as well as anything that is being proposed along Oshkosh Ave. They did have some questions and concerns, the same, because those ponds have been currently constructed as needed and what we were thinking would be coming along Oshkosh Ave.
Right.
So, yes, we're thinking about that as well, and those will have to be some big costs and some big, discussion we'd have to have.
Right. Then I guess the other question or main concern I would have is in concept 3, and I just passed these for you folks to take a look at on the other side. That's kind of the concept plan of the overall development, but if you look at the dark blue building, which is the hotel and that jut out to the north, when we've had Hilton, Marriott, Radisson, everybody up here, it was wonderful to stand on that little berm that's out there left from the golf course and say, here, look, this is what the view's going to be, and a pond and a beauty and everything else. Concept 3 puts a parking lot right in front of it. And I guess I would have concern about that, because right where that little bump out is on the north side, that in the back is typically your outdoor space for the hotel guests with outdoor grills and a fire pit and so forth, that they're encouraged to take advantage of. It comes out from the public lobby on the first floor, and 4, 5, 6 o'clock at night, when people are out there, if they're grilling on the grills or just sitting around the fire, they're going to be staring at a parking lot right across the street from them. And I say that was one of the attractive things that the representatives from the National Flag thought it was a great idea to have it right across from the park. So. The concept 1 and 2, and I'm not sure how large the parking lots are, but to me, don't look like they're more than about a 20 or 30 car parking lot. And if you're going to have events and have some kind of a field where you could have a soccer, field or something else, likely you're going to have 50 to 100 people or more, on some of those. Or if in that great field, if you were to have an art fair, I'm sure you're going to have hundreds of people coming and going in there. So I guess, again, I know we don't want to turn everything into asphalt, but just a plan enough that we don't have to take over a lot of the overflow parking on the other side of the street.
Do you mind, Tony, if I address some of his questions or concerns?
Absolutely.
And I would agree with you, Mr. Hoopman, that parking lot shown in 3, that's one of the notes I made, was looking at either option 1 or 2, getting it over towards La Quinta and Two Brothers, where the existing maintenance shed is for us. We already have impervious surface there, so getting it shifted over there. And it's great to hear your concerns, too, because I think that helps justify it. And then I think when we were talking with Smith Group about the flat lawn, or it's showing just a soccer field or a football field, that's more of an open play area. I don't think programming wise, and the board will have that discussion, is I don't know if we're looking to have major community events there. So as far as the parking goes, I think it's more of a trailhead parking, walk and passive use, and I don't want to speak for them, but in my mind, we have the Leach, we have Menominee Park, we have other areas that have those big community events.
Right.
And I think when we heard from the neighborhood, they were expressing their preference not to see major community events there. So I think that's something we'll have to talk about programming wise, but I completely agree with the parking situation too, so.
I guess that's all my,
One comment, you indicated an art fair, but I'd actually agree that an art fair would be a great event there because of its proximity to the water and to the highway, and access that. And so I'd actually just like us to think a little bit bigger than that as well, so, noted, so thank you.
Can I just climb in one? I would actually disagree. I like the idea of, as far as what we have in our city, there seems to be plenty of those spaces. Even though this would be really cool, it would be definitely a duplication of other resources that we might already have and be investing in. So that's just my opinion on that, so.
Can I counter?
Sure.
Awesome. Well, I hope that we have art shows come back to Oshkosh because we nearly don't have as many as we used to. So with the changing of South Park in the last couple of years, the major art show that we've had has not continued. There's some derivatives of it, but I think continuing to instill art like we already have within this plan, I think is still an option. So I don't disagree with you, but I think it's still, we should look at it as what are our options available for what we're trying to instill, so.
One thought on parking, just kind of going back to our stakeholder process with Oshkosh Corp. There are 650, I think, parking spaces out there. I think they are definitely being able to, for a couple of large events a year, not every week, but if there was the art fair, a marathon, something like that, they were definitely open to a parking share for those sorts of events. And so I think the idea of not over parking the park for Easter Sunday, mixing my metaphors there, but I think that opportunity is there for using some of that infrastructure for special events. I think they're really welcoming, the employee experience of the park, and if they can be a good neighbor with things like that too. The other thought, I think there was also the comment on the flooding too. For option 2, think about, especially on the west, that whole linear ribbon of blue. Anywhere that's green, think about that being able to be blue at, when there's high water. So we're kind of showing a typical case where that's the water level, but if there's large amounts, think of those starting to become, larger ponds as the whole green area fills up too. So, that's not just water moving, it's also flood storage and within that sort of green margin around the blue there.
Greg, I'm glad you brought that point up about Oshkosh Corp. And we don't have anything in writing, obviously, but they were very agreeable to, on their off hours, allowing that for special event parking. And Bob, so keep that in your mind, that we may not have to accommodate for those special couple
sure.
large events, that it may already be available. So
They've assured us that they're going to open their parking when we need it, if it's available. Yeah,
Sure.
so.
All right, another,
One thing I want to just interject quickly. I want to remind everybody, like I said, we can put all these plans together, but right now, option 1 is the only one that's going to allow for crossing those things in the wintertime, those ponds and everything, because you don't have current, you don't have salt runoff, you don't have anything. So just keep that in mind. Right now, option 1 is the only one viable for ice skating and crossing that waterway in the wintertime, so.
yep, we'll go ahead and have, yep.
Yeah, I'm not sure I completely, I think it's still early in the process to make that statement. I think these could be designed to work however we want them to work in terms of what water goes into them at this point. So I think if we want to use them for skating, we're concerned about ice melt things. We've got a series of places where water's flowing to right now. So if that's a criteria, I think we can look at that. And I think we've heard enough right now to know that is a criteria.
Thank you. Do you want to come up to the microphone?
May I speak right from here?
We prefer you go to the microphone.
Well, Terry Steele, 2848 Sheldon Drive. One quick question, then a comment. For option 2, has anybody thought about, for using this Four Seasons, putting a sledding hill on one of those hills?
yeah, I think any of the earth movement that goes on over there will accommodate for some sledding, and it may not be as high as what some people would like, but definitely there's going to be some options for sledding there as well.
Great. And then one comment on option 3 on the west side, talking about the larger field that might be open for, and it sounds like just not necessarily for events, but just kind of a free area for people to do whatever they want to do, soccer, whatever. I wonder how much that would actually be used. And the reason I bring this up, and a lot of you may remember when the zoo expanded and in Menominee Park, and there are a lot of complaints about, oh my gosh, this area is just, everybody uses it for picnicking and frisbee and everything else, and now you're, gonna put in the elk exhibit and everything. And we did a study through the summer and really watched what the use was in that area, and it was zip. And so I'm wondering if you, in option 3, establish this large field for public use, and what if nobody really uses it? Then you've really lost some of the other options. So just a thought.
Thank you. Other comments from the public? I think she's leaving, so yep.
Kathleen Propp, 1936 Hageville, and I don't really have a prepared statement this time, but I've got a lot of questions. I like option 1. I'd like to pull some things from option 2. I don't like option 3 because I think it's too busy. And I don't want this area that's going to function as a large event area. Personally, I want small events. I don't want large events here for the reasons that have been talked about. I also don't like the node over off Catherine. I don't think the neighbors, if they got wind of that, they would not like that at all. Catherine is a quiet little narrow street now, and it's literally not accessible to any kind of traffic. It's narrow, and I don't think we want that parking shown off Catherine, that node. The node, yeah, but not the parking. And I would like to see the picnic shelter there better incorporated. Picnic/restroom shelter, better incorporated.
The existing one you're talking, Kathy? The existing
Yes, the
restaurant? Okay.
existing one, by the ball diamond. And what is a nature playground?
It's a playground.
Hey, you want to come up here? Please?
So in lieu of traditional climbing structures, plastic and wood, there's things like logs, rocks, and climbing nets, and so it's encouraging kids to kind of be more inventive in their play, and basically play in the dirt as opposed to just climb around on a big metal thing.
Oh, okay.
So-
I would like it.
Okay.
I would like to have it available. Well, who knows? I might want to do that. I like the restored natural shoreline. I think that's just vital. So if we can get grant money, focus on that, that's excellent. What in option 2, what are the stones, stepping, whatever they are, on the north side? Those 2 areas of step something that I couldn't read even with my magnifying glass.
So the idea is in that zone where the park pinches down because of the Oshkosh Corp property.
Right.
We're proposing that the whole of the shoreline would get cleaned up in one way or another at some point. So at this location, instead of it just being, stone revetment mixed with smaller scale material or planted slope going into the water, this would actually be a series of stepped stones, that are pretty regular in their dimensions.
Mm.
So it would almost be like,
So you could literally go down and get your feet wet,
yeah, yep,
sort of thing?
yep. Almost like bleacher seating, but made out of giant pieces of stone.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we can make a note. Did you have a picture of one of those in your previous projects, Nathan? If not, we'll bring one back to the next meeting. 'Cause I think that's really a neat feature that we've heard from the community, getting closer to the water and getting, but I think it's a good question to show us an example of that.
Another question, kind of a grayish area just west of the court property, west of the court parking lot. It's outlined but not really identified. Is that a detention pond?
Yeah, what is that? I had that question.
Oh,
And then the same with a little pond just north of, right here.
Yeah, this one, and there's actually a little one down here
No,
too.
no, no, no. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm glad to hear that parking could be limited, because the more we pave over this park, the less park we have. And that's just really important for us to understand, I think. I'm not crazy about the long pier, where it calls it a fishing and boating pier. We're fishermen, well, of sorts. We have a fishing boat. And fishing and boating can be a conflict off the same pier. And it's really bad, like in Menominee Park, when kids are fishing off the big boat launch. And so I don't want something that attracts both. I like the idea, if the beach is in fact a launch area for kayaks and canoes, I think that's great. I think that's wonderful. I really would not want little fishing piers off the end of this trail, because I don't think this isn't our fishing. I know it's a nature area and it's wonderful, and most of what's here I kind of like, but I don't think personally that that's a good idea. Although I know fishermen fish right off there where the golf course was, because it's right by the water. There was a road right by the water. They could park, and so they fished. Was it a good site to fish? I don't really know, but I had another question. Okay, probably, well, it's been pointed out, but changing the ponds and the design of the water flow and all that can be kind of exciting, but obviously it's got to do its job. And that's the most important thing. So I would favor whatever pond, meandering stream alternative is going to meet those needs for stormwater management, as well as beauty, as well as water quality, retaining the water, helping contain it during flood periods. I think that's where we'll have to go. So maybe that will drive which plan we like better and how it works better.
I'm going to go ahead and maybe if you have just one more question, so we can keep moving with the rest of the group.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm done.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Yes.
Margie Davy, 885 Portside Court. I have to commend both Parks Board and Smith Group. This is outstanding. I mean, I like different things about all of them, and I loved hearing your conversation. And I do have just a couple of little ideas. First of all, I have to say thank you so much for saying yes, restrooms on the west side. That was number one on my list. It looks like it's really a long ways from the west side to the east side, and that could be critical. I like the idea of the stepping stones as it was just described. I was a little curious what that meant too. However, if that's along that stretch, I would highly encourage putting shoreline restoration along all the rest of the park area there. I think that's very critical. It's part of the whole concept of the nature. And also, for the pavement, I would discourage the use of asphalt as much as possible. Ray, is the Riverwalk along there going to be asphalt?
Yes.
Yeah, right along the water, we're putting asphalt. And how is that maintained?
How is it maintained?
Yes, do you put that black coating on it like every couple of years or anything
No,
like that?
we'll do crack filling every couple of years.
Yeah. because of the dangers of some of the chemicals that are used for asphalt as well as the asphalt itself. Anywhere else that you could mitigate that with pervious pavement, pervious pavers. I know concrete's more expensive, but it's much safer in many ways. I would just suggest that you check into that. And I'm guessing that this is on one of those other 12 layers, Nathan, but I didn't see any bus stops. You're putting bus stops in, right? Working with the city, of course, but there are going to be places for bus stops, because we do want to encourage people to come to this park using public transportation as much as possible. And of course, it goes without saying, you'll have lots of places to park bicycles, right? Okay, I think that was all. I love it otherwise.
Thank
Parts
you.
of each.
Thank you very much. Any other public comments? All right, do you want to bring it back to the board one more time? Any other thoughts now having heard statements? I just want to say thank you. It's wonderful to have you here and to have feedback.
I'm gonna go first here. So, just acknowledging the public's input on some of these, I think is important. And so, I had not thought of, and so I want to thank Margie for bringing up the access of bus stops. So I think that's important to work that into this plan. I know that area would be kind of an area where there's not a lot of bus transit already. I know there's some along Oshkosh Avenue there, but it may not take much to jet it out into certain areas, especially if we're expecting more commerce to show up in that area as well as we develop. So I think there's benefits there. I guess I'm open to seeing, not taking a lot of time of thinking about the impact of this plan on the neighborhood right there. I'd be interested in seeing a little bit more discussion or reworking of how that works with that Catherine Ave in that area. So I think that's important. That road that's on there, that's Eagle, correct?
Yes.
That goes into there. And so would we be extending Eagle Street to Catherine? Is that what's
Correct.
going on here?
Yes.
Okay, to create access for a parking area, if we were to keep that parking area there.
It would actually connect, those side streets that currently are not, that are dead end. And that was actually something that some of our engineers came up with, saying might be easier and better for them as well. Traffic flow, as well as snow removal and plowing, but also potential for on-street parking and other things. And I understand there's going to be concerns by the neighbor, and we'll hear from that. And I think everybody, Parks Board, us, we all need to understand that it's not a 5-year plan. This is a 10, 15, 20-year plan that we need to look at. So
That's a good point, Ray. Thanks. And I think the other thing that I had was coming back to option number 2. I think it was Nathan. I think you talked about there being steps on the trail at the peak of those hills. Is that correct? And you come up and just kind of visualize this for us for a little bit of what's going on there.
So I would just kind of generalize and say, wherever we have some of these significant earthworks and we
Right.
want to get people to the top, we would provide both an accessible means to do that and a direct
Okay.
means to do that.
That's what I was looking for. So I didn't I didn't want to assume that we were going to create a spot where not all people could get.
Right. We would not do that.
Okay, just making sure.
Right. Anything else?
Nathan, you feel you have good enough direction at this point that we can?
Yeah.
I think we may need to have
I do think we set priorities well, which is the important thing. I think it'll take us a little bit of time to kind of process all of it, but I think we heard a lot of good input on not only what people like, but why they like it. So I think that will help us, find some resolution between the plans and come back with a good hybrid.
Okay.
Can I say one more thing? I just want to come back to that conversation about parking, and how it just relates to that neighborhood that's in that area. So, that neighborhood went from being a kind of a quiet neighborhood to soon becoming a kind of a very busy neighborhood, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that for those residents. And so, those adding more vehicles in their neighborhood, can sometimes create more challenges in those neighborhoods. So I think it's important to acknowledge that the less we can impact those neighborhoods in creating their peace of mind and maintaining their peace of mind, it's really important to do that. So, thank you.
All right. Well, I think we're going to move on to the agenda to item number 2.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Which is discuss and recommend disposition of land on Rath Lane. Ray.
Yes. Let me shift gears here. I understand that the packets may not have come in the mail, and we'll apologize for that because we were late getting some information for this section of the discussion. So we do have Kelly and Alan here from Economic Development, and you did receive it in your email, so hopefully you were able to take a look at what was included in that. What we're really looking for, and it's some discussion that the Plan Commission will be having and has started to have a little bit of, is the Rath Lane, which is behind the old Robbins building. There is a request by some interested developers along those properties to have that Rath Lane vacated, which typically would mean that the roadway, 50% of the roadway goes to the adjacent property north and south. There's some interesting situation there because my understanding is some of it belongs to DOT, or Kelly will get more into it and she'll show you a lot of the exhibits. But really it's a request of possibly vacating Rath Lane, and then providing more of an opportunity for some of the developers that are interested in that property. Is that accurate to start with, Kelly and Alan, before we turn it over?
Yeah, we can clarify a few things, but yeah, to get it started,
Okay.
I think, yep.
Thank you.
Sure. Just to clarify a few items, the vacating Rath Lane, that's something that Plan Commission recommended to council for approval, and council will be considering that next week at their meeting. So that is something council does. This body does not discuss the Rath Lane street vacation, but Ray was correct. When DOT came through and redeveloped the area with the State Highway 21 reconstruction project, they did take some of that land or acquire some of the land from the golf course, and then another portion of the land that was used for the Rath Lane, that cul-de-sac, was actually acquired from that private landowner. So per state statute, that land, if it was acquired from the property owner, is returned to them. So the land will be split up in a few different ways, and it will be up to council to decide if it would be disposed to the private developer that is requesting it. Today, though, we are going to talk about that excess land to the north of the Rath Lane cul-de-sac. That is Outlot 2 per CSM. And if you recall, I was here actually just probably about a year ago. I looked at the report from a year ago. We were talking about Outlot 1, which is just to the east, that a different developer had requested that the city dispose of, and he would acquire in part of a land swap that we were doing for him, dedicating right away, and we gave him some additional land on the north side. In the memo, I just explained that the land is it's a small, irregular shaped land, about 0.3 acres. So from a city standpoint, from our zoning code, stormwater requirements, it doesn't serve a big purpose as far as if it be for parking or any other use. We can't sell it to, have somebody put up a development. It just does not work. So that's why when the private developer asked if we were interested in disposing it, we entertained his request and wanted to bring it forward to this group here. Was there any specific questions from the memo at all? We did a few different drawings as far as if there could be parking, but As you see, it is restrictive with the city zoning code with setbacks, and then they'd have to account for stormwater management, and there are some utilities on site, so we'd have to work with some easements for the property owner to the south also.
Kelly, is this for the hotel property?
Nope, this is not. This is right on the screen here. This is for the property just to the south of Rath Lane. The hotel, the old Robin site, is just to the east.
Okay.
So this is owned by a separate developer than the developer that's doing the hotel.
Okay. So the private landowner to the east has basically the property line is the red area there, so this just lines up with.
Stacy, or somebody, could you kind of scroll down a little bit just so we can maybe see that whole area? Oh, yeah, perfect, thank you. Nope, no problem.
So we're just making it basically contiguous without the carve out to what's next door.
Right, yeah, the property owner sees the yellow boundary on the south, and then up obviously just to the Rath Lane right away. That's his current property. And you'll notice on the very west side of the property, he is dedicating additional right-of-way to the city. This is for, per recommendation from KL Engineering, who did our traffic impact analysis, to extend North Keller. And you can see on the west side, thank you, on the west side, they're also dedicating the same, because we will be expanding it to do some roundabout modifications.
Turn lanes.
Turn lanes, yep.
Okay.
Not touching the roundabout itself, but
Yep.
adding turn lanes.
Yep, thank you.
Just to get onto 41 easier,
Just a
basically?
straight shot,
Okay.
yep, exactly. So, yep, he owns these 3 parcels right here, and he is, as I mentioned earlier, requested vacating the Rath Lane, this portion right here. By right, this portion would go back to him, and then this area would go back to the city. But this is the area in question. Staff sat down with our engineers, with Jim Collins, to talk about, could we have anything, develop here, or a parking lot? Couple issues we did have was pedestrian safety. How would we get folks across the street? This is a curve right here. There's no stop sign. So that is something we would want to consider a little bit more in the future. But in the meantime, we have somebody that is willing to purchase it, or, working through the land swap, whatever we may do, who will put it back on the tax roll and develop it for the redevelopment project that he is working on in that area.
I guess I would be for this if the Parks gets to keep the money. Alan, do we get to keep the money?
That is a
For the park?
That's traditionally been the council's direction, yes.
all right.
But in this case, we are acquiring a lot of frontage along Keller Street, so I don't think there's going to be very big dollars involved.
Okay. But whatever dollars there are, though, I get to keep them for the park, is it?
That's been the past practice of the council, yes.
All right.
I can't speak for the entire council.
All right, thank you.
Makes sense to me for all the issues or the comments made in your memo, which I think
I agree. So is this an action item?
Yeah, what we'd look for is a recommendation. I don't know if there's anybody here from the public that you want to ask
sure.
if there's anybody want to make comment. It's up to you.
That's a good point. Is there anybody from the public that would like to make a comment on this? Please, go ahead.
Kathleen Prop, 1936 Hazel. At the Plan Commission, I suggested the possibility of an overflow parking area there. And I didn't have your memo in front of me. I mean, I don't have it now, and we didn't have it then. And I don't know why there can't be a few parking spaces on that north end. But yes, the lane needs to be vacated, and most of it needs to go to the adjacent developer. So I guess what I'm saying is, if I were you right now, I would not vote for it, but I'm not you.
Thank you. I have a question. Is there, when you're talking about some of it belongs as the vacation of Rath Lane, some of it belongs to the DOT, some of it might go back to the city initially as part of that road too?
The DOT is not part of it at all anymore.
Okay.
The part on the very, in the cul-de-sac area on the very eastern side, if it was vacated, it would go back to that private property owner. This whole area right here. And then part of this would go back to the city. Per state statute, that's how they vacate the right of way.
So in any event, is there if the city were to take a different tact and try to get that land from the property owner, is that something that's considering as far as a larger overflow lot in that spot? So instead of viewing that top section as the I don't know the words exactly right, but in between the red lines along Rath Ave, if that all became part of the city property, could that, going the other way, could that then become more area for parking or things like that for that overflow?
Yeah, and we do have a visual here that does show if it would not be vacated, or we would, keep it as a parking lot.
Is that this?
I think they are on there, Kelly. If you go into the PDF on the bottom, there you go.
So is that one even including, so if the whole road was not vacated, that's all that we could get out of it still?
Correct.
Oh,
Correct.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
And-
didn't quite understand that.
No,
Thank
that's
you.
okay. And the other item is, per the recommendation with the traffic impact analysis, they did not recommend, there is actually a DOT access restriction coming up Keller here, and they did not recommend access onto here for this developer, just with the traffic coming. So we are looking at having some access for him up in this area potentially. So that would be something else we would have to consider, is maintaining access if, we do force the property owner to have his access up to the north there, maintaining that at all times for him, for his development.
Kelly, do we know if this is gonna be parking for him, for his development?
I don't think so.
Okay.
He has, with the corporate business park zoning, he needs to have quite a bit of landscaping. He also has to do his own water quality. And so that would be probably a good spot. There is wetlands in that area too, so my guess is it'll probably be pervious.
So it'll be green space, basically?
My guess is that
Okay.
is what it would be,
All right.
with probably some landscaping, if I had to guess.
Some kind of water quality treatment, because he still has to take care of his stormwater
Perfect.
quality.
Okay.
One that would beat having to plow 7 spaces for that. Yeah, that's good.
So just so that I understand what we're doing here. So if we vacate this property, if we suggest that we vacate the property, we're saying that we're going to give that developer all of this here?
The Parks Board would just be doing a recommendation for the land disposal to the north here,
Okay.
right up here, with the part that's the outlot that is green. It's kind of confusing because, we kind of have two different requests,
Yeah.
two different processes, so I understand.
So if we don't recommend the vacating of that property,
Okay.
what happens?
At that point, he wouldn't be able to develop it, and the city would just have to figure out, how we would accommodate access in and out of his site. And if we would recommend not vacating Rath Lane or keeping it as is, that's something that, we would have to talk about with council and plan commission.
Sure, so if we choose not to vacate it, they still need access to their site, is what you're
Yes,
saying?
yes.
And so this road here that runs into the cul-de-sac would be that access, but they would have to rework how that works based on what the DOT wants and the city wants.
Right, and city would continue to maintain it, streets division or parks, whoever,
Snow
I guess, would
removal.
own it, to make sure he always has
Street washing.
access, yep.
Okay,
Because right now, he's the only one that really utilizes that Rath Lane right now.
and he has a use for that street, so to say, but not so much for that use of land right there is really what's going on here.
Well, you're saying the developer?
Yeah.
He does have a use, part of the zoning code, he does have to have a certain amount be impervious, or pervious, he can't have the whole site be impervious, he has to do a stormwater
Sure. Okay.
quality, like I said, there's wetlands in the area, so
And
he
it does
does.
drain to the north,
Yeah.
so that's where they usually
So
collect
everything's gonna go that
stormwater,
way.
is to the north.
Okay. So essentially, if we vacate this, if we provide that recommendation, we're saying that it's your responsibility to maintain that piece of land.
Yes.
I mean,
We're
yeah,
we're relinquishing any public right to that land and how it's used.
right.
So, okay,
Short of the plan commission and council approving the site plan,
sure.
because that'll
We still have
happen.
our stipulations that we put
Yes.
in there. Yes. Okay.
The one other thing that I would say, and I support this vacation because I think that whatever kind of parking, and I just was trying to entertain like all the ideas as we were thinking about it, but I think that it'd be very difficult to have even a satellite lot there and then cross Keller to get to any part of that. I don't think that's a realistic option. As far as putting a crosswalk and doing all that kind of stuff is, it just doesn't quite make sense for that standpoint. So that's my opinion of that.
Agreed.
Any other thoughts, or should anybody want to make a recommendation?
I got thoughts, hold on.
Oh, my goodness, all right.
So, I guess I want to bring in Ray, I guess I want to bring in your thoughts on this, and I'm actually not opposed to hearing from Nathan, if he's still here. He left on me. He just left. I guess I'm wondering how that area could be used to support the park. I mean, if we were to talk about that area somehow being trailed up as an area for like bike racks or something, or something, you know, so that people bike there instead of riding through, they can lock up their bikes and they can traverse through that, you know, through that way. It doesn't look like the trails operate that way at this point because we weren't really thinking about that piece of land being in there. Though in number 3, there is an access point right there. So I'm just wondering if there is a benefit to holding on to this and putting it into the lakeshore, into the lakeshore plan.
Are you asking for my opinion at this point?
Yeah, why
okay.
not?
All right. I guess working through this whole process with Smith Group, we were under the assumption that that's not a utilizable area. And I think it's going back to Tony's point of the traffic flow that's going to be coming through there and what develops along Oshkosh Ave and the amount of traffic, because a lot of the traffic and parking and amenities for a lot of those facilities are being directed towards the backside, so there might be more vehicular access back there. And I think just looking at the concept that, and Kelly, you might have to pull these back up if you go down to the PDFs, that just looking at its small buildable area, parking, I think, you know, I think it's 7 spots, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 potential spots. And then looking at the long-term cost of the city maintaining that area, long-term, putting in a parking lot, is it beneficial to us? My opinion, I think it's not, because we're focusing more on the lakeshore property north of that site and trying to accommodate the parking there. And I think because we're trying to encourage good development along Oshkosh Avenue, and I don't want to speak for getting rid of parkland, but I think we're being good neighbors, working with getting a good development in there as an adjacent neighbor to the park is what I'm looking at. So I wasn't looking at that small parcel as being a really usable spot. Back to your question about bike racks and so forth, we're looking at those in all those other areas in the park. Mainly by the parking lot that would go near the hotel and Two Brothers, because it's really going to be a trailhead site, I think. So we'd probably look at more of those facilities in those areas, as well as off of Pinoqua, because those will be the 2 main accesses. So in my mind, I think it's being a good neighbor from the park to have a good development and allow that there.
So the developer is not going to develop across that road, correct? That is not
Across
their intent?
North Keller?
No, Rath.
If council would elect to vacate Rath Lane, yes,
He
then
would.
he could. Yes, he'd
He
have
could.
a larger developable area.
Okay. All right, thank you.
What is he thinking of developing?
Looking at quite a few different uses right now. My guess is it could be a mix between commercial and retail, even some other mixed uses. So he will be under our corporate business park zoning requirements. So if you look at the Casey's going up, Oshkosh Court building, it'll be some of those similar looks, you know, a nice building.
75% A
All
materials.
around, yeah,
Okay,
all sides.
Okay, right.
Right.
Okay.
Have that one.
All right, shall we? Anybody want to make a recommendation? Are we sure we're done?
I'll make a motion to
We couldn't really.
vacate the
Actually,
property.
It's disposition, actually.
Disposition, okay. I'll make that motion.
call roll.
Dirth,
Aye.
Royal. Metz,
Aye.
Miller,
Aye.
Peschel,
Present.
or against.
Just put
Aye.
present.
I can vote present.
Threw me for a loop, Bob, sorry.
All right, next items on the agenda are staff reports. Ray?
I'm going to keep it brief. Thank you. Because a lot of my work has been working with Smith Group on the concept plans, but we are currently in our budget time. Our budgets are due this Friday to the city finance department, so we're working on putting those together. We're also in the process of working on our staff evaluations at this time, so it's a busy time for us with all those falling at the same. So I'll keep it at that.
Thank you, Ray. Chad?
I'll just want to make a highlight to some of the project-related items that are happening out in the park system right now. But I think overall, there's a lot of things happening, which are very positive for the community and the different quality of life assets we have. And I know coming up here in the next couple of weeks, they're going to start bringing materials in for the Eagle exhibit down at Menominee Park Zoo. So construction will take place on that soon. We're currently still working on the communications infrastructure for the zoo and Menominee Park for the core area on the south end. Hopefully we'll have that up and active here over the next month and a half if things come together. Working with our electric department, our electric division on that, which is a good project. Will include the internet, security cameras, things of that nature for the zoo and for the core area of that park, which will be a great enhancement for public safety and for our use down there. Spanbauer Field Athletic Field development. Actually, the asphalt was going down in some patches today. Hoping to polish up that field here within the next week and a half with seeding and restoration. Rainbow Athletic Field, Sid Supley's field that we're working on there. It's been a tough go here over the past month and a half with weather, but fence posts are in, and actually we'll have concrete in for the apron and the dugout areas here by the end of the week. Tech Miller Park has been a continual project here due to weather since 2018. I applaud the Ferry Crossing Neighborhood Association for their patience with us working on there to make sure we can get through this park here before the snow flies and get it restored so it's useful for their areas next year from that. West Haven restroom is everything's finalized through council. We'll be starting the interior construction for that renovation with hopefully completion here by the end of the year. Little Oshkosh playground will start taking demolition for that site on the week of the 26th. Met with vendors today. Looking forward to seeing that process over the next month and a half. 24th Street boat launch, you've probably seen some of the railroad work being done with the bridge over 45 in that area. They're just finishing up their restoration and seeding. We'll be pulling out of that site, and then they'll be heading south to other areas along Ripple Avenue and stuff like that. So Menominee Park, if you haven't been down off of Hazel, things are coming together with Hazel Street itself, but the trail, you could actually see the aggregate along that stretch from Merritt all the way to Irving. Looks pretty nice. That'll be a nice enhancement for that area. And then also Ray mentioned earlier, but the Lake Share Trail from Heritage Trail from 41 down through there has started taking place too. So a lot happening. I think that's very encouraging for the community to see when they're out and about and understanding what's happening in our system. So
Just a question about Hazel. Did we add any type of sidewalk on that east side of Hazel?
That's the trail he's talking about.
Oh,
that's the trail on
that
the
is the
east
trail.
side.
Okay,
yes.
just making sure.
Yep.
So and that goes from Merritt to Irving.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Awesome.
And just to highlight a couple operational items here, or event items for us for the department. Tomorrow night is our last Live at Leach series concert, Tuesday night. Hopefully people come down. It's been a very good year from that. I'd say if we'd averaged around 1,000 people a night for the 6 weeks is awesome and doing well from that end. Pollock Community Water Park actually closes on the 21st. Next week, Wednesday, but we have our final season pass appreciation night this coming Saturday. And this week with the Pathfinder Camporee going on out at EA, we'll have a lot of additional visitors to our park settings this week, primarily Wednesday through Friday when we worked with them on there. So that'll be a lot of people in the park system. So it'll be exciting. But
So
You're good, Bob.
now, just to kind of dispel the myth about our visitors, they're not just enjoying our parks, they're also helping us and volunteering around our parks and in our community.
They might be volunteering on their own. I don't have anything scheduled
Okay.
as far as volunteer-wise for services at this time, but they do go out and help and try to make the community better.
Sure.
Absolutely.
But we sure enjoy them being in our community.
Yes. So, that's it for my report. I don't know if there's anything else people have questions about.
I just want to thank staff and citizens left, but I mean, all the input, everything, and especially the board here too, but I mean, all the input that it's taken to get to this jewel we call Lakeshore Golf, or Lakeshore Park now. But, I mean, it's amazing to see the community come together on this, and all the input from all the user groups and all the individuals, the open houses we've held. My hat's off to you guys at Parks, Ray. Please thank your people. Great job, so thank you.
Bill?
Okay, I don't have a lot to report, but the staff has been pretty busy with landscape maintenance this summer. It's been one heck of a growing season with all the rain and everything's growing out pretty fast. So we've been plenty busy with emerald ash borer mitigation. We've had a lot of trees affected over the course of the winter that we're struggling to keep up on the removals and that sort of work. So we'll be probably working on that well into the winter. We've also had numerous storms, as many of you know, so we've been chasing after a lot of storm damage over the last several weeks. So the crew's been hanging in there for us and getting it done, but we've had a lot of service calls associated with that too for residents where there has been damage throughout the community. So, but otherwise we're going pretty good. Got a lot to do yet here this late summer and fall and winter. So just enjoying a lot of the progress that we've been making out throughout the city too. So.
Thank you. Any other business? Is there a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Didn't think so.